Godsking here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Welcome to one of my tier list videos. I haven't done one of these in a minute, but like as always, I'm gonna try to go and spice some things up and contribute to some busting stuff. Hope you guys will enjoy this one. As this one is gonna be a little bit more passionate for me in this sense, as you see obviously on the screen. This is going to be every For Honor arc slash event, or whatever the title actually is, ranked from worst to best, aka I'm going to be ranking the For Honor lore. These are all the events of the most, I feel like, relevant credence that has happened in the last almost seeming 10 years of For Honor's lifespan. And what is being said, the most important and the most, I feel like, relevant, right? I might not have every event entirely, but these are all the events, I'm pretty sure, from chronological time at start, involving the For Honor story mode, Apollyon, and all different type of stuff, and all different type of layers of lore. Some of these different things are going to contain all the stuff of relevance within it, because you're talking basically about seasonal events or differences in that, right? And that's pretty much it for this, what is being said. But as you see by the tiers, right, starting from the top, we have peak storytelling. Peak, obviously, of the greatest renown, aka like the greatest form of writing the For Honor lore is given, because the For Honor lore went boomingly wild downhill, I feel like, ever since like 2020. The crack started to show in 2019, but really from 2020 going onward, there's been a very mixed bundle of disappointment and all around greater A just dissolve a lot of his goodness. I feel like niggas is not in touch upon preciseness, you know what I'm saying, to actually put together some of this lore. But, you know, I'm gonna try to, best coherently speak about that greater shit when we really get to that, as you know, boy is, prone to do. But besides that, Certified Slap is the A tier, okay, credible of like some good all around saying story, right? Bussin', simple, bussin', good put together meal, cool, stands pretty fine. Mid, simple, mediocre. Absolute cheeks is just cheeks. DC slash question mark is meaning I don't care and or I don't know, you know what I'm saying, because I didn't really care for the lore to be coming from that, and I have relooked over some more and listened to like the most infamous lore person on For Honor, to arguably the only, because the actual original For Honor lore person legit quit because of the For Honor lore being that godly garbage, bro. Like, I'm sorry to be laughing the mix and kind of like not being full civic. Can we talk about how your entire channel was based and built off the back of producing things that people did not know about the lore, you being the lore insight, and you quit because that's how tarnished the For Honor lore was? That's insane. So, like, no disrespect to that guy right there. Like, I understand it, but, like, damn. That's unfortunate. It is what it is, though. Yeah, we're not going to be starting chronologically. I'm going to start from the top, go from the bottom. We'll see what happens. Starting with the Serpent. I think with this case of lore, it's a mix between being mid to cool. It's a decent introduction to a very morally mixed, ambiguous person with some cool creative, ties and things, and brings interesting, like, moral mixed questioning, but wasn't too invested. So I'm kind of saying cool or mid, but I think I'm going to put cool for now, right? Then we have Shield of Savangard. I think it's mid. It's a cool legend thing involving the case of Goodmunder, very interesting character, but I feel like it's wasted potential. They did not tap into a greater form of his history, lore, involving the case of, Savangard as a place, being a record of, a territory in Valkenheim. They did not tap in, like I said, into his actual character and just made up a legend for him. I like the hero skin, even if, again, it's a little bit of a D grade and not as much, coolness, rawly, like his actual design. But at the same time, I just feel like it's wasted potential and kind of like deprived us of greater looking into his actual character. And it just kind of stands as whatever, right? Then Sword of Ashveld, I think, is sensibly about the same with like Serpent War, but it's a little bit more distinct and interesting, not only from this event, because we're only talking about the lore, not the actual events in it, because it was the events, then this would be entirely different tier lists. You guys want me to do that? I'm down to do that, especially like with some other compadres that have played this game. But Sword of Ashveld tied into interesting crates of lore involving the first form of Warden of Ashveld, of not only a grounded and mixed interesting renown, but showcase a lot of, more feel like sauciness in the case of, the story. Granted, I don't want to go and throw some allegations, but it's somebody that took big inspiration from Raven Knight and making this Warden. And I just feel like, that's a very interesting thing. And I feel like the story evolving the case of the Unsung Knight and, the cataclysmic land of Heathmore, post-cataclysm or whatever, right? was very interesting, and I like how it was done. I think it was very sauteed and defined and busting. But yeah, pretty much it when it comes down to that. And again, not throwing any allegations, but I do think that shows a little bit of not just the coolness of Raven Knight storytelling, which I've always said for you guys that have heard, you know what I'm saying, that I think Raven Knight storytelling at core is one of the most stellar form of writing I've ever heard, right? And I wish nothing but good for the brother in that, right? But it's surprisingly they took inspiration from him and arguably cloned his character Ruth, right, for their actual warden, who yes has existed since the dawn of this game, but doesn't change the fact that they arguably like reformed that person into a different character. Because to actually greater explain that, right, without going like on a whole moon level like Martin Luther King's speech, so let me put, Ruth is a warden that was turned into a warden from being a crook or criminal taken in by a warden or a knight per se, was taught in the way of the traditional sword, became the case of his squire, formed into being a warden, and seeing this person like a father, a great mentor, a great, ally, and all that shit. She wanted to live in his footsteps after his unfortunate demise, and through there, she would be basically the same. She would give people wisdom, heartfelt, inspirational call that would pretty much gather those who see no worth and fighting for something greater than themselves to actually make something for themselves. And the Unsung Knight helps people in this very desolate, desecrated time. She represents all the ideals and stand for the case of, the warden. And even though the first true warden was Ramiel's, remember this is historical fantasy, not historical fiction entirely, right? Even though it's still, fiction. I'm just saying like there's a little bit of smidge difference because in case it's not historical fantasy, is shit that takes place in a historical mixed matter, but is entirely pulling all different type of aspects of deliberately fiction and whoppy-doo conventional, groundedness into shit on an aspect of fantasy. So like The Outpost, For Honor, obviously, Game of Thrones, other kind of things that are, taking in credit of a mixed historical baseness, right? That all mixed bag is supposed to held to a modern day thing and not like ancient times, but is obviously deliberately a whole plane out of this world. So yeah, that's a little bit of like example. Historical fiction would be like Ghost of Tsushima, Assassin's Creed. I would argue, to an extent, you could pull Far Cry Primal or Rise of Rome in there, where it's not actually, obviously, adaptation of history, but it does pull aspects from history and stays decently in tie with it, even if it does pull aspects of fantasy and wild shenanigans of that sort. But I don't, again, want to go on a whole tangent. I just want to explain that again. I think it's a great, pull of lore, great producement, not just interestingness and not just character, feel, takes back, the entire land to a plane that has been seen, hailed, and regarded as pretty much Florida and has a lot of unique aspects to that because of that. But yeah, pretty much it for that. Next we have Treason with Maddox. Would like to say it's coming between being like top mid to cool, because like I think Maddox is an interesting character that brings an interesting case of like, ideal and perspective. Like fuck a ancient oath that does not help us in any way. I'd rather live. It's either you eat or you get eaten. Kill or be killed. The strongest of the strong or weakest of the weak. And he will relish in that activity. He got a saber-toothed head. Got an interesting case of ties to him. Now stands as one of the case of the enforcers or head honchos and Horkos. And will feast on that glory or that type of shit. His unfortunate killing of his brother and is standing on like a very mixed moral sacrifice, right? AKA like what is this goodness of, honor and the sacrifice of war, right? It's very interesting, endearing, question. I do think that's pretty cool. I'm actually putting out all that being said and everything that comes in account for the story there. So because like greater shit that would come there, like for instance, like with Varangian and shit, right? Because like all that's basically the same within the season. So yeah. Then the Seat, Wulin season for some Wukong shit. I think the Sun Wukong lore is a big, not just whoppy-doo disparity of difference on Sun Wukong in the worst ways in some occasions, but I do think has a great sense of fondness. But I will have to be honest, even with my fondness, like for the Wulin getting a season, the music, the galore, the balance, I do think the seat brought a great deal of shit. I think what they did with Wukong dispersed a lot of his uniqueness and flair that made him stand out. I think a lot of ways they did shit was not really the best with how they did it when it came down to representing his story, making him somehow be canon to For Honor in a weird sense of legendary way, and correspond with the fact that not that much shit really goes on with this, besides just the lore with like his iconic opposition and the theater goddess to demon. That's really it. It doesn't really stake that too much out there and real care or intrigue to me, to be honest. Next heresy, now I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be the first one, and don't care / question mark. I'm not even gonna say this lore is bad. I just didn't really care for it and peek into it. And a little bit of shit that I did is only about the Pirate Hero skin. I didn't really take that much from it, but I don't want to full call it mid because I'm like, show this haven't guarded a seat. I actually did peek into it, and I think a lot of things that they've done, what I'm saying, with those are mid or waste potential. And like in cases like you want to know more about what I have to say about Wukong, simply put, they don't understand why he does what he does. They make it be like someone going to be this more sympathetic or noble aspect person, and entirely destroy the aspects of the nuancedness of him that make him be intriguing and unique. And yes, it's their own version. So if I wasn't going off of adaptation perspective, even in their own version is very mid. It's a very mid season, regardless of how you see it, I feel like. So yeah, the Demon Dagger. First one I think is going to be in Bussin'. I love Yeko Meiko's story. I love the skin. I love every aspect of it. I love the Japanese folklore. I love the mythology. I love all the perspective in it. It's nothing but a porridge of succulent, nice, fuego de fete activity. It's very gas. And I really love how it's coming together, right? So I feel like reasonably the Demon Dagger should be there. Not just again from the creative lore coming with that. A lot of his aesthetic, feel, sauce within it, story-wise, and really telling of the fact that sometimes the most noble things require the most strongest wills, and even if that brings you to the deepest bellows of hell, that call for glory will still always be in sight. And so it's a very beautiful story, but also heartbreaking and very disturbing story, because Yeko Meiko would have to live for that curse even if it did bring a blessing. Next is Curse of the Scarab, and this did bring my main Medjai, and even though I think this is better than the other case of events that come later that are entitled to people, yeah, if it's an obvious, this shit mid as fuck, bro. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I would put it just at top of mid in comparison. Because, like, here's the thing, bro. This shit did not really do too much to really hold up a whole different weight to me, right? And I feel like I forgot Shattered Dimensions, or what the fuck the actual season was called, Evolving like a Fira. And the thing with also Wild didn't, like, change too much. And some of these different seasons still tied together, that stuff, so it still would be there. But if I had to say anything about, Shattered things, I probably would put it in mid too. And then it's the only thing I actually forgot because everything else is in tie with it. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, though. But yeah, like, simply put, like, Naverka has mixed understandable sense of, like, reasonable crash out to come after Bolthorn. Bolthorn's reason for doing what he's doing is interesting. And then, the reference to the biblical story of, falling frogs, droughts, blood when fucking water, disease, all type of stuff, cursing the land because of this, the basic karma for what Bolthorn has done is interesting. But my problem mainly has with the fact that I feel like there should have been more in-depth showcasing of shit there about the case of, not only the relationship Naverka and Bolthorn had, even though it was kind of shown in a decent record, right, of how they talk about each other, and mainly Naverka, that he saw Naverka, as a noble and respectable man, an honorable man, but he betrayed him to gain glory and not only his selfish, satisfaction, and coming all the way from Valkenheim to Africa and getting blessed with something like never seen. He betrayed an honorable man that was being real to him, and the Furka showed that shit, and it's not only costing him not only his duty, his ancestral right, as this scarab bracelet is a lot more than what is beneath the eye, because it brought magical disaster, but it's also a pride thing. So some way I can respect and or idealize that's cool. But Neferka as a character is very mid. I like Major as a character, and I think there's a lot of cool things with him. But nobody can deny that Neferka, probably out of everybody in the entire Front Runner cast, his personality-wise, is very basic. He's very plain. He doesn't have anything too much standing out besides being very respectful. He do got drip and like being cool in voice acting and having a very cool moveset to most people, but he's just simply flat, basic, unequivocally just boring like a motherfucker. There's nothing of greater strength of, I feel like coolness in his character besides him just being a borderline just whatever the fuck character. He has nothing about him with actual greater intrigue or substance. He's just very whatever. Like I said, he's unsubstance feeling. He feels very like niche minded and ever greater kid shit, and all around like his goal after he gets his vengeance after he's done, because understandable that he doesn't go back to Egypt because Egypt is entirely fucked. It's ruined. The cataclysm dispersed all goodness from that, right? Like, I never actually got confirmation exactly what the cataclysm did to Egypt, but like with China, where it's a desert or, desecrated, entirely fucking obliterated by different accounts, the entire landscape of Japan, making it unlivable, right? And then Valkenheim is literally a piece of Norway or Scandinavia, another place in Europe that literally was able to, through the erosion within the entire continent, greater aspects of the landscape, was able to pour onwards to the fucking continent and, being placed there. But I wouldn't be surprised if Egypt's over here looking like a Fallout map or it got snow over there, which, obviously doesn't happen. So, that's a little bit interesting, and that's all I'll really say. Next, we have the case of the Golden Age, I think was mid as well. I would probably put it, here, to be honest, because, Remiel isn't that interesting to me. I think this fantasy aspect of Ashveld, even though it is just a legend and it's very mixed for it to be true, right? I just feel like, how much they tap into all these goofy shenanigans and peeked into the most weirdest regarded shit. I just felt no all-around greater care for it, and it just didn't really sting out to me. And Ramiel as a skin, I don't hate it as some other people. It's just not too anything different to me. It's just kind of like chunky elf-looking knight that doesn't really have anything that stings out or causes something of iconic standing. So, I don't really care for that. Right, it also goes, for the case of Bolter skin, which is just Black Raider, to be honest. It looks like fucking a cursed Senator Armstrong-looking Raider. Frozen Shores. Pirate. Probably say that is reasonable. It has Pirate. Introduced an interesting case of conflict and crossroads and shit because of it being released with obviously in a winter scope time and having a lot of creative essence and craft to it and building upon interesting introspection on lore. There's a lot of fun aspects to it that I think is, very gourmet crafted in the sense of building up to a call for more than just her. In this case being, I forgot her name, Pi Yong or something like that, aka this adaptation in the sense of baseness to Ching Shua, the actual queen of the pirates, that Chinese pirate of legendary regard. I think that's kind of really all I have to say about it. It's just whatever, simple, thing. Tempest, I really care. Don't really know what happened in it. Don't really care about that. Have 2 Goldens. My bad there. Those Tempest, what nigga got the shit twice. That's entirely my bad, and I realized that. Yeah, the Sunder, which I think was all around pretty slap in its core greater form. Okay, you obviously had the build-up within the conflict between Chimera and Horkos. Beings that push for peace, strive with hope, and have will unchained, right? You have these ferocious, tenacious, ruthless motherfuckers in Horkos. And it's an interesting coming together conflict that tackles a lot of ideals, says a lot of interesting things. It does really bring you to a level of deep analyzation never even saw. So I feel like that's the dope part about it, to say the least. But that's all I really have to say. Then you have the case for the Eclipse or Mayhem, which I think is when the cracks really started showing for the greater case of the Fawn Lure. but I do think stand pretty good all around and being cool. Griffin facing someone like Astra, but Griffin being basically the bannerman of Chimera. As I don't know if he's actually the leader of Chimera or Chimera is actually held to a whole different person, right? But being the bannerman of Chimera and the leader of Horkos in the case of Astra, them having an iconic fight with Eclipse, with that game mode, with Draconet, with all these other credit things coming with it, makes for a very interesting, not just fight game mode, but also stand of lore. And I do like a lot of the different parodies shit, and the fact that Griffin is this changed, redeemed, refined dude facing pretty much his past in a human being. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Tyranny, probably put the same. Everything that came after in greater form of this brought and introduced a lot of gourmet collection of shit that not only brought great hope for me, in like the case of Great Push for, busting acts, not just in lore, gameplay, characters, and Warmonger was a very exciting character when she dropped. And I think it does stand pretty defined in a lot of its aspects, and I do love that she reckons Polyon's aspects in a more of the destructive, very more heavy, callous, gruesome essence. Polyon was cunning, witty, decisively unparalleled, but her presence always brought a great mystique, a great essence of being a parallel of all aspects of man and woman. The ideals for peace cannot exist without conflict, and she personifies war and is a warmonger on no other. This woman, she cherishes the idea of being a warmonger, but sprays chaos, right? I really like that. Now, Marching Fire, I think it's another form of bust, and I'm kind of mixed, so I want to put it over Demon Dagger, but I do think Marching Fire is pretty fucking bust, and I think it's pretty lit. Not only did it introduce, to me, a very worthy faction to the game, the Wulin, Warriors of China, Kung Fu, proficient, brilliant fighters, with 4 characters of interesting regard: Shaolin, my original main, Tiandi, Heaven and Earth, Jingjun, General, Guan Yu, and Nuxia, Warrior of the Sword, but as well of the Dance. Very defined shit. Or an actual name Nuxia, meaning just female warrior, correct me if I'm wrong, and being a warrior of hook swords in the dance, fly, swift, beautiful, all that shit. It brought not only 4 interesting case of lore aspects to the characters at hand, it introduced a new hypothetical antagonistic and interesting look into another land, another people, and the culture. They came here on conquermanship, but every person in the Wulin has their own unique reasoning for why they are what they are, and there's so much coolness coming together within the characters. I love everything that came with it, and I definitely think it is one of the most peakest moments for Honor. I think it's actually outstanding what they did with it. So, yeah, that's just me. Plus, it brought Breach, bro. Like, I know that's a gameplay thing, but ain't nobody can deny Breach hit, even though the teammates fucking suck sometimes. Raining Inferno. Don't really care. Remember it. Then this, with Chairman and Very Colossal Things, of For Honor here, which ties into a bunch of Getter stuff, like later on with Afira and Ocelotl. I say probably all around put this over that. It's because of more of the events and the skins and other things tied to it, and just the uniqueness dived in, but it doesn't really have anything too outstanding. Ascend right now, I think, is the epitome of mid. I don't really care too much. I think it's interesting how there's Corsola and Colton having the same role of warmonger, but I'm very more essence of not full pure evil. Because, like, to me, Astra is just evil. Like, there's no sense of symbolic, in-depth, physiological, and psychological philosophy to really try to infer from her, where she as a being doesn't give any poke of greater aspects of maybe like character depth or anything of that. She, to me, just gives the same essence of what Kylo Ren is to Darth Vader. But to her credit, being a better version of that type of, characterization or archetype in writing, she doesn't derive anything that she does from any greater standing besides trying to, live up in the footsteps of a woman that brought about the dawn of a whole new age from her death. She cultivated an age of wolves. She did all type of shit. She doesn't really stick out in greater character substance or depth to really have me really feel any sense of connection or really remembrance of her and Girlfriend. Don't get it twisted. I think Astra works as a villain. I think Horkos works as a group. And I think at the core, especially because remember, to me, I really feel like For Honor really died on its actual greater substance matter, right? In 2020, when she was introduced to even 2021, I think there was a great Boston, pool of intrigue and sauce, but the sauce never really hit really different. It became very mild and even like just unflavorful. And to me, Astra is just, again, the pinnacle of evil. But she's evil in a way that has some interesting growth of, like, not just changing the world around her, but also calling to more interesting aspects. Because Astra has to exist for some way what Griffin does to hold as much weight. Khotun seems like a woman that is spurned by ambition, very much flagrant activity, but is all on record of being a woman that purifies the means of strongest of the strong to pillar greater remark. In this sense, repping the Mongol Empire behind her, and even though I haven't read every aspect of it, all of her actions are tied to the great symbol of peace, which is most of the idealization and or beliefs of most Mongols, especially Genghis Khan, who was, pushing out to, go about conquering and slaughtering, pillage, possibly rape, and all that type of fuck shit, genocide even, for a lot of the shit that he was doing. So, again, that's the difference in comparison, but to me, Ascend is showcasing a possibly higher threat than what's known. Maybe we'll tap into some more shit when the rapier character comes, but I just, me personally, I don't really care. Like, it's not too much standing out. I just think it's, like, whatever. Khotun thing is literally exactly the same. Khotun's introduction doesn't really tie into anything a greater grandstand substance matter to me. It's just kind of whatever. Then you have Aramush and Shamans, case of thing. I don't remember too great singing much in this, but I'll probably, put it here. That goes for Grudge and Glory. Put it here. These are all introductions of, Ronin, Celtic Wild Shaman, Highlanders that have obligation to the Vikings. Don't really fuck with them, but they come here to not just only uphold their order, uphold their word, be strong people in what they do, and stand on business for the people around them, and be all around solemn gents, but also be very much proud on laying down a smackdown. Don't my glass! But the Gladiator is a very intriguing, infatuated even character to me, where he sees the battlefield like a bigger arena. There's nothing more glorious than bathing in the blood of your enemies while in the midst of a battlefield of the most craziness. In the words of Apollyon, order, chaos, peace, whatever form of ideals that drive what you do, there's all a different cycle of tranquility and assertion of peace to be crafted in those means. A monk once told me that in this case, any battlefield could be the most calming, peaceful, and salivating almost moment that you could be in. From all the glory and all deaths that have come, that is the most glorious place a mighty warrior can proudly be. Now, that entire quote is a mixture of some things that was said by her and different mixed matter statements of the past that have an inquiry for what she has done, and also lore that you can obviously hear Apollyon in her own voice, or sound to the voice of Apollyon, right, with obviously voice acting. But it is true that Monk did tell Apollyon that all perspectives of life are all tied to subjectivity and different ethics on the calming storm of it. So Gladiator seeing the battlefield as his sense of, like, basically pullback on life, and not just being a simple fighter or a warrior for hire or mercenary or anything of that qualm, and just battling for the greatest means, regardless of whatever that's tied to, just because. Showcase not only him being kind of like a goon for violence, but a guy that doesn't hold any reckon of greater intricate, aspects of belief or tied to things of greater narrative substance. He simply put is a man that will dine and feast, even fuck the battlefield's greatest, glorious aspects with no care in mind. He is spurned by the grace of pretty much endless conquest. and he could care less about what that comes with, right? So that's interesting to me, to be fair. Even with that statement, I'm just gonna put it. Actually, I'll do that, right? Like, it's only because of those greater lore factors. Because to me, like, I don't think this season brought too much lore. Shadow of Might, the introduction of Shinobi Centurion, the Roman Empire, does some interesting shit. I think it's right about the same level when introducing a cool case of, concept with how the Shinobis work and the version of, the samurai and Japanese culture, Centurions, and its greater ties to the Romans. It's very interesting. I think it's pretty cool. Simple as that. Then we have the event game mode, mixed same time, the raid on King Pass, Zanhu, and other stuff. I think it's very cool from all lore poured into it, but doesn't sting that greater, but it's definitely up there on some coolness and peak. But I think mainly because of the fall of the emperor of the Wulan and China brings an interesting tie of shit, because the Wulan were not pushed out of Heathmore. They made a form of a foothold in it, right? They made like some form of fort or base, but they do always call back to their home. And it is almost of every time interesting to see the type of conflict that comes from Heathmore always coming back to China and what that would bring, and the fact that they did come, to Heathmore and the means to conquer. And this off-brand Blackstone Legion, which I feel like was deliberately a plan by Horkos to pretty much be a breadcrumb, to actually bring about new dawn of chaotic means for not just Heathmore, but also to kind of feed into the instinct of almost every warrior being the epitome of killer, demon, all type of shit. And in case it kind of sounds weird, not just like bread crumbs, but in the sense of being like bread come, bring about whatever possibly to come about. In this sense, like, she sent this off-brand Blackstone Legion to basically instigate and coon together the order or aspect of being an opposition that is one note, linearly defined, that could be taken out easily. And anyone else that come from that will be taken out. And this is a thing that did not actually start the means for conquest or conquerorship by the Wulan. The Wulan was just ordered to do that. They were just doing what iconically most different empires do, in this sense, to go about running over a great deal of land to expand, explore new routes, and gain resources or whatever new greater stir of power, capabilities, shit like that. But this is greater, tied to the fact that over in China, the cataclysm basically made the Sahara Desert on a greater run of it. And the fact that, like in mixed different parts of, Chinese history and real life, China got a lot of shit in the inside multiple times, distorting its mind and causing great, disarray to the core fundamental way of life. But I just feel like how the Blackstone Legion interacted in that event and causing the unfortunate correspondence, but eventual, new gouge into a new level of interestingness and fulfillment of not just cool content, cool aspects. Team Pass being a bussin' map for Breach, and just looking into the perspective of the Wulan being actually, for once, opened up and weak. They felt what the other wars in Heathmore have felt for countless years of being attacked, pillaged, ransacked, hurt. They have felt the unfortunate stain of violence or suffering on the same qualm as the others, so it really downs to earth the Wulan instead of them just being this imperial force coming to march down on them. They're not the marching fire. They are as well human, just like everyone else. And obviously the lore already presents that, but it makes them actually feel more in line with everyone else, as the Wulan aren't just outside niggas. The Wulan, I would argue, are just as much of a part of the factionary dispute and conflict, just as much as the Knights, Vikings, Samurai are. Obviously not to the same extent, but obviously a great deal, right? So that's kind of how I feel. Year of Reckoning is tied to not just these other cases of events, but more of the fact of, setting up the fire different shit for, what will come for the case of the other shit. So it's pretty much in between, to me, sort of Ashveld and Tyranny to mixed regard. I feel like, just setting up like the fire to be had, and then when Astria came, that blew great up, and then when Mayhem came and greater, of course, to other shit, right? But Aztec was already there beforehand, and this is more like counting for the fact of the matter of like, yeah, Horkos is on a warpath, but they Stampede won't stand for long, and that's when obviously Big Griffin came into play. So yeah. Next we have the For Honor story mode. Absolutely peak, at least for Honor. Like I think the story mode, regardless of whatever nitpicks and make kind of, problems and shit that you can, get on. I think for Honor story, there will probably be never a story that For Honor could write, could arguably ever put into a story mode with the current writers that they have. Not the full diss on them, but I feel like they have a full, grandstand purpose for why they're doing what they're doing. They're trying to write stuff, but their writing does not really steer to anything. I feel like For Honor does not have a clear vision. They're kind of just writing shit as it goes. It doesn't have a game plan that's really tied to greater echoing as something of greater nuance and complexity. While For Honor, with its story mode back in 2017, I feel like was divinely tight knit, was gourmet crafted, was coming together as such an interesting, unique form that it can never be debated was not peak. This shit was defined peak writing. It had a great deal of sauce coming with it. From characters, from morals being questioned, from ideals, iconic moments, the memes, my God, the memes, and all that glory hound that comes with it. I feel like there's a lot of gourmet shit that came in tie with it. I feel like a lot of things that make it what it is was very cool to me and very interesting. And Apollyon as an antagonist, I think Apollyon is the best character in the story mode. I feel like all her lore was so excellently done. I think the dark, gritty aspect to her is so appealing. The voice actress, profound. I think everything that makes her what she is, every credit of what makes Apollyon so good is that she symbolizes the insanity of war, but also the calling for it. The fact that in some way it is true that without war, without the most disdain, despair of our lives, we could never grow stronger. And if you do get consumed by that, if you get devoured by the shit that is a leech on your soul, you did not deserve to arguably even stand for anything. And that's something that's interesting to look at. It's interesting to look into her psyche. It's interesting to dabble in different aspects of her. She's cunning, she's witty, she's proficient. Her quotes are so quotable. She's revered for so many aspects of shit. And Apollyon is one of the most admired and loved villains of not just, I think, Ubisoft, like all their writing from Assassin's Creed, Far Cry. I think she's up there. Like easily a top 10, top 5, shit, even a top 3, my nigga, of just brilliance. But I think she's one of the best female villains of all video games, bro. And I don't think I'm wrong to say that. Like, I think Apollyon is so definitely done. I think she's beautiful in her character. I don't think there's a single flaw with her except for, they could have, I guess, greater, tugged at the ideals and explore greater aspects of arguable credit of, like, looking into her mind. Like, there's no one really actually tangling, that shit that she does into their mind until it really affects them or is really a bridge broken for them. Like, there's an argument that in the story, right, that characters don't really get in touch with greater sense of how this war is becoming, which is just becoming a endless array of blood and desecration, destruction to people from the inside and on another, until it really affects them. And there's a mixed bag of a lot of shit that could have went behind the scenes. Again, that's where the better tight-knit, better all-around defined narrative structure could have been put in play. Because to me, like, I would give the story mode, if I'm being as critiquable but being generous, I think you could give it an 8. Maybe you could give it a 7. I don't think it's bad. I give the story mode, a good 8 something. My only problems is I think it could have been longer. The story mode can easily be like 3 hours to 4 hours long. It's not that long, depending on the case or how you doing shit. And I've done an all-nighter. I've recorded it. I've done all different type of shit involving it, right? And, a lot of gourmet shit has been greatly put into it, regardless of the circumstance. But I would argue to some element of degree, there's an argument to be had that it doesn't really stand that dummy out there in the case for actual story writing, but I think even if you want to say they could have explored greater philosophy take on what Apollyon's doing from different protagonists or main characters, that there could have been a question they put into play. Is Apollyon necessarily wrong with the foundation of her beliefs or credit of what she's going for? And obviously there's reasons to believe Apollyon is wrong as she is, causing callousness, causing disorder, causing a great deal of unneeded flame to basically burrow into different people's shit and killing, even though probably not perfect people, but people she has no right just to go about killing. A lot of what Apollyon does is kind of inflicting overexertion and pain. I mean, we will call what Apollyon's doing war crime. She's a warmonger. She feeds off of war. She ponders how to do it, and she literally caused almost every conflict to happen. I mean, there's an argument. Her entire existence, her entire case of legacy is staying built off the back of causing pain and pain and pain to try to crack, a whole new level of strength out of a nigga. And it's just weird. And that kind of sounds weird. It's called pain and pain and pain to go about crack. Kind of sounds weird. Calling crack. I'm not on the other side of it. That's just funny. You guys know what I'm trying to say. It's causing more and more stream of bloodshed, despair, fuck shit, just to crack with strength and purpose. It may be a person that makes them strive to be beyond their limits and not be a feeble worm in the grand scope. They need to evolve. They need to adapt. Wolves over the sheep, predators over the prey, conquerors over the conquered. That is why she does what he does. You know what I'm saying? And that is a very busting, defined writing thing. That, again, is why she does what he does, right? And I just love how it's put together all around. I don't really have much more to say. The For Honor story mode, I do think is peak fiction for Honor. And I think out of, almost everything that Ubisoft has made is definitely up there. I think it's very bussin' and, all around. I think it's very divinely crafted and it's all around greater form of shit, right? But, yeah. Next, we have the Assassin's Creed tie-in. Absolutely cheeks. Doesn't need to exist. Doesn't make sense at all. Comes together in the most weirdest way, you know what I'm saying? Not just only is it the most random insertment of lore, it makes no sense. It should even have any possible tie in any form of way and connection to Assassin's Creed. And this is where we're about to get into the shit that I feel like is just unneeded and not good. Like, to me, I think Our Story Mode has dissolved its greater goodness, but I can't agree that it's just all around mid if I'm really trying to be generous. But you can't argue that greater form of the story ties within this shit is all around not really good, and it's just kind of bad when you really look at it because it's such a D grade. But actually rehearing this shit, re-looking at it, even if there's greater lore bits that have been talked about, not just watching a recap, right? Actually rewatching discussions about the lore and reading some different pieces, it's just simply not really interesting. Like, it's not actually good to give time and effort. Like, there's so much random reading to be done about this, and it's not in a very good, constructive way. And unlike Marvel Rivals, where it has comics, you have lore involving the characters, you have shit that you could get some level of immersive with, you could get some incentive. For Honor does not have that. Now, it's not a big problem like I'd argue other games, or like my main critique about Elden Ring story, incentive to give a fuck, but this stings the most out. This doesn't need to exist. Why is it a thing? Doesn't need to be canon. And like I said, we'll never get to the peak writing that is this. But with that being said, even if we learn about what Apollyon does in comparison is good, why Assassins will even be some way be able to come together in a way of, like, not just actual realisticness and For Honor with the world. Not only could the Assassin not work in the actual thing, but as well not even be able to become with any sense of actual realistic sense or sauce to be had, because it's such a plain, dummy, weird, contradictory, and blatant, just goofy idea. So out of everything, I feel like that's the most hilariously cheeks, right? And I want to get this out the way. Like, I don't know nothing about Destiny. I've heard this is cheeks too, because this doesn't make sense as well. Like, it doesn't need to exist within the thing. So there you go. Like, just cheeks, unneeded, doesn't need to exist, right? Again, peak story time, known for how, why Pawn does what she does, right? That's why she does what she does, in a sense to spark about, means of chaos and war, but this shit does not become shit. The Resistance, I think, has a lot of good ties and greater merit of shit, but not as interesting as it could be. I know there's a lot of greater physiological and form of like intricate look at like morals and history, try to be slapped into there, but I feel like it doesn't really sickle at my mind in greater form or heart. Like, to best explain it, because again, I don't want to go on a whole tangent because I went on a whole reasonable fact rant about the goodness of For Honor story mode. But I just basically want to say that again, none of it really taps at a nigga mind. And thinking the most, precise as I can. I'm glad we know to speak about this coherently. And it's probably ain't gonna be as long as the others, hopefully, right? Because some of them have been doing this for, I don't know, almost 50 minutes. Yeah. I just feel like it kind of is like dog doo in the grand essence of like real pulling that greater essence of not just character diving into actual uniqueness. I feel like the characters of the Resistance are not as interesting. I feel like the way they've ran different missions and shit within arcade is not very interesting, cool, or really as enticing as it could be. And I just feel like it's whatever fling of doo-doo butter mess that doesn't really give me any real care for actually the story of it. I feel like it's just kind of a random thing that, again, is not really tied to anything of greater form. It isn't tied to my mind, heart, soul. It's just entirely like whatever desperate attempt of trying to make some form of like interesting rebellion story that doesn't really cover anything of greater height, I feel like. And again, just don't really have much words to say for it, but the fact that it's just unsubstance feeling. So if I was being generous because there's something here, it could just be mid. I don't think it's that bad, but I think it's just as much credit of cheeks where it doesn't, again, follow anything of greater substance. It doesn't stick at some greater merit. The philosophy or greater philosophical, greater talk, because it gives an obvious philosophy, talk of the mind, the brain, the psychosis, in a physiological way, right? Where we talk about the ideal of like, why people would do so much horrendous, full, foul, nefarious work to grade a like strife for something in a way that doesn't really, I feel like, tackle the actual appropriate essence of talking about, okay, we do what we do for the ideals of something very much hellish, like despair, full on cracking out demonic aspects, rituals, blood madness, like no other. Like, because again, I feel like I'm saying it in the most simplest form, but you gotta really adhere to what I'm saying. I feel like an idea of just this shit not really opening up doors for something to be asked is very simple. Like, to me, I think Horkos, unlike the Blackstone Legion, in some aspects where there is a greater sense of nuance, complexity, where it's not just simple black and white. There's an essence of gray, but a lot more pain-smoking matter of bad that pins them in full deepest form of being disrespectful of like any compassion, any sympathy, any grandstand possible, I don't know, interest in seeing from the bad guy's perspective. The type of shit that makes you think that they're not entirely wrong for thinking what they do. Horkos has none of that. They don't peek at that greater shit. They don't poke at the mind in the same way. Like I said, it doesn't touch my heart. It doesn't actually go to the word of craft. The rebellion doesn't really haul at the idea that yes, there's some value for why Horkos has been made into what they are, why they are these rabid, countless time, callous and fuck niggas that do all type of shit off the back of the decree of war is everything. And without it, we are a fossil, very demoted from what our actual true purpose is. Like the sundowner belief that war is a part of who we are. Why fight it, right? We are all cruel. We just lose touch with it as we get older. I feel like none of that's really in the cool instant craft anymore. And yeah, to me, like they try to make Horkos or make some deeper, again, psychological essence to it, but never actually plucks at that. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't actually stagger my mind the same essence as others. But yeah, I mean, I think the second greatest story is the Truce of Wyrandel Hope. I think it introduced a very interesting concept, a truce. I think it gives interesting perspective on not just the idea of all four factions coming together for four leaders that want to push for the same thing. It not only proved that peace can be gained, right? If niggas really tried, and it took in the For Honor lore probably years upon years, mixed with actually in time, took us from 2017 to what, late 2019, 2020. We was getting up into shit, you know what I'm saying? Like it took about good, 5 to 6 years off from that to make that shit happen. And so that's why, to me, that was very interesting. It's very interstellar in the capability to incorporate an interesting audacity for not just storytelling and other foundations of that as well when it came down to pushing to make peace. Has been a hard fought thing, but it was a very much succulent end for everybody. Where we had not just something that was never possibly thought to be seen as a peace in Heathmore between all rivaling warriors was never thought to even be a credit capability. But Ying, the Warden, the Raider, and this Kensei found that. They found a credit of possible greater sense of purpose, not just as warriors, but as well for their people. They were enjoying their time. They were doing their thing. Like the case of, Apollyon's old castle, which was castles upon castles, and corresponds to, having great peace, love, and prosperity and push. And every fight, everything was all off of laughs. People loving each other, having handshakes, eating with each other. Motherfuckers from whole different sides of the different, ideals, philosophy, background, culture, enjoying each other's times, being human. That is the most beautiful thing I feel like about that season. That niggas can entirely be from different cultures. Niggas can kill each other. They can pillage. Motherfuckers, people have probably been raped, slaughtered, all that shit. And they can push past that to have the great taste of peace, hope, and even prosperity like no other. They can aspire to be more than what they were before. They can aspire to that prosperity, to a greater form of plentifulness. And I feel like that is the most endearing thing. That's the most endearing thing about a story like For Honor as a whole, where there's been a story defined by a tragedy, unfortunate trauma, and great deal of catastrophic damage to not just people's lives, but every count of their soul. And even in all that, we can find a sense of bittersweet joy in all the flurry of violence. Heathmore and his people are flawed. They have been so in-depthly hurt and crunched on the back of the necks about the ideals of war and peace being stagnant ideals. They think that if you are opposite than another, that you hold no bearing of even weight, compassion, or empathy. But we are not lost from that. Being flawed does not mean that we are indefinitely bad. It is ignorant, naive, and very much self-destructive to deny us the possible passage to greater purpose. And that's where Apollyon is wrong. We are not based as wolves. We do not have to live to a psychotic, hurt, fragile mind and soul woman that would push to basically soak the seeds of blood and truly insanity like no other, reveling in all aspects of the most grave, destructive end, all to fulfill a falsehood, a false pretense of honor. We could strive to live with integrity. We could stand for something greater. We could do profound shit. And the only people holding us back is us. No one defines our fate. No one chooses what we are. Not gods, not warlords, not cowards. All of us. Knight, Viking, Samurai, Wulen, Outlander, we all have the grace of possibly grade A finding what really matters. We all have the choice to pursue and preserve our way of life to the greatest renown. If anyone dares to deny us that capability, it will be by us, no one else. No one asks about that point because the man has been staring at the screen for a little bit. Because obviously, speaking what I said, but that's all I have to say. Which being said, all right, I know that's a big long thing, but that's pretty much me just really trying to poke at the greater essence and locking of what that story was. I feel like as they not only drove for a greater core, bigger, I feel like soul peak where it really made you take into perspective all of the shit that these people have done, and they again are still coming together from whole sides of different coin and trying to preserve not just their homes but their way of life. We all bleed the same blood. We should not be out here causing this much destruction to each other. We can be better if we so choose it. And again, the only people holding us back is us. No one else. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. That is my message. That's For Honor's message. This is mine. Every For Honor arc/lore ranked from worst to best. Hope you guys have enjoyed. I'm see you guys next one. Peace out, my army. Love y'all.